The wayfinding landscape is changing, so welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast. We want to connect with leading experts, tech innovators, and key contributors to exchange knowledge and innovation in physical and digital wayfinding. We want to shape the future of wayfinding through discussion, collaboration, and shared expertise. And this is why we have created this podcast series. Enjoy the episode.
Welcome to Endpoint's Wayfinding Xchange Podcast, presented this time by me, Alison Richings, Wayfinding Design Director here at Endpoint. In my 22 years in wayfinding, I've seen interest grow in how to celebrate long-term and major donors. Often, cultural institutions turn to us wayfinding designers to create recognition pieces because of our expertise in information design. But this mostly marks the end of the giving process. In this episode, I have come to the National Theatre on London's South Bank, where we were lucky and incredibly proud to be asked to create a donor recognition piece, to delve into the world of giving from the perspective of one of the UK's most celebrated cultural institutions. It is my great pleasure to welcome Kathryn Marten, the Chief Development Officer here at the National Theatre. She has been involved in the development team for over 15 years, as well as a trustee at the Bush Theatre in her spare time. Welcome, Kathryn, and thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, thanks, Ali. It's great to be here.
Good. I'd like to really start with a bit of an understanding of what the role the development team has within the theatre. And I'm really interested in how it intertwines with the theatre's mission.
Yeah, sure. So the development department is responsible for all the sort of private sources of income for the theatre. So that can look like corporate sponsorship and membership, or trusts and foundations, and memberships from individuals, the sort of Friends style programme, legacy income, and major gifts. So basically all sources of money that's given privately as a donation.
That's amazing, because that's a really wide range of different types of people.
It is. It's a really, it's quite a range of giving and quite a range of motivations within there for why people get involved with the National Theatre. But we've got an incredibly generous group of companies and trusts and people who want to support. So we have it's a great privilege to do the job that we do.
So how does that intertwine with the theatre's mission? How do you set a strategy for how the giving process works?
Well, at the National Theatre, we really believe that everybody is welcome here. So we're really keen to have a way of supporting theatre that's open to as many people as possible. So the entry point for giving is, really anyone can make a gift at any level. It's not just about major gifts. So our priority membership scheme is a really great way of people giving a sort of £80 a year membership, so they have a closer relationship with the theatre and get to enjoy perks and benefits such as priority booking and a newsletter that gives them sort of behind the scenes information. But really, we have to raise a huge amount of money every year, and without that, we just simply wouldn't be able to make the work that we make. We have 3 theatres here on the South Bank. We make about 20 shows a year. We are Central London's largest factory. We have this huge theatre factory on site. Pretty much everything that you see on stage is made here in the building. So we simply wouldn't be able to do the scale and breadth of work that we do without private philanthropy.
And do you think that the world is changing and that the way that institutions are funded is changing, so therefore there's maybe more reliance on private funding than there has been previously?
Absolutely, and that's something I've seen completely change in the sort of 20 odd years I've been doing this sort of job. I mean, it's there was a time when government funding for us that's through the Arts Council, but government funding was the primary source of income alongside ticket sales. That's no longer the case for lots of places, including the National Theatre. And now we raise more money privately than we receive in government subsidy.
That's incredible.
So it's a real, over the last sort of 3 years, that's been a real turning point, and I think is really interesting in terms of what the future holds. We're moving much more towards the American model. And that's not a good thing in lots of ways. I think what we have in the UK is this balance of private philanthropy and public subsidy plus ticket sales is actually the very best way to be funded. I think it makes us be commercial. It makes us think about what our audiences want, but it also enables us to be really risk-taking and serve up things to audiences that they don't yet know that they might want to see. It also helps with our social mission generally in terms of reaching out to the community and all the amazing work we do with young people and communities around the country. All of that is hugely expensive, and ticket sales and government subsidy alone can't begin to cover the cost of those activities.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's mind-blowing, the thought that we're moving towards a completely different system. I suppose I see it a little bit more as like a Victorian system rather than the American system. In the Victorian era, there was a lot of, private donations and much less funding from any kind of central government. It didn't really exist.
Absolutely.
So maybe we need to think a little bit more Victorian than American, and maybe there's a better way of thinking about it, or maybe not. As the case may be.
I think I really hope that we will continue to have that balanced model that we've had over the last few decades. But inevitably, I think all parts of public life, the subsidy is declining, and the arts has to take its share of the cuts with that. We're in a much more economically challenged world than we were a few years ago, and unfortunately, we have to respond to that and be inventive and innovative and work out ways to continue with the mission, not draw back just because our government subsidy is reducing.
But in a way, there could be some really positive moves in that as well, couldn't there? I mean, there is this sense that potentially if you're bound by the government because you're being paid that way, that you should only provide audiences certain things, whereas if you're paid for in private donations, maybe you can be more innovative and risk-taking because there isn't that, there's less of a sense that you're spending the money in the government way, I suppose. That makes sense.
I think that's why the mixed model's great, because there are many different priorities to speak to. Sort of what the government of the day wants its kind of crown estate arts organisations to be doing, what philanthropists want us to be doing. We're here to serve audiences. We are a charity. Audiences are our beneficiaries. The communities we work with and the artists that we work with are our beneficiaries, essentially. So we need to be responding to what a huge variety of people want. So I think it's really brilliant that our funding is quite spread, and the people that we are responding to are quite varied.
I think that does make lots of sense. I'd love to hear a bit of the story for the fundraising campaign that was behind the donor recognition piece that we created. I wondered if you could tell us any more about that.
Yes, absolutely. So that gorgeous installation that was the right answer. Oh God, I love it. I do really, really love it. It's a brilliant piece of art that we're really proud to have in our foyer. That came about. That was the culmination of our NT Together campaign. This was the campaign we started when we had to close the building due to the COVID lockdown, and sort of very quickly it became apparent that this was an existential crisis for theatre. For let's face it, for anybody in the mass gathering business, it was an existential crisis. And the National Theatre historically has been very successful in terms of selling tickets. So our main source of income is ticket sales. And when that just disappeared overnight, we had no sense of at that point of when we would reopen, and yet we still had a cost base that we couldn't reduce. We had a huge number of staff at this enormous building to look after, so we sort of had all the cost, and most of the income had just dried up overnight. So we knew that fundraising was certainly was going to be a key pillar to still existing, let alone thriving, to still existing. And it's really bizarre to think back to that time now, because now we're really firing on all cylinders. It's strange to think of that an empty building that we had at that point. But yes, we knew we were going to have to raise a lot of money. Within a few weeks, we had modelled many, many different scenarios, but the number of 40 million was the number that felt like what we had to shoot for over a 2-year period. So we created the NT Together campaign and really looked for funding from everywhere. And it was quite an interesting moment, actually. I think was a real turning point in the way that we think about fundraising here at the National Theatre, because we really sort of moved into the charity space in the way that most arts organisations have never really occupied that space, because we weren't using all of our channels. Our communication channels with our audiences weren't being used for ticket sales for the first time ever, and obviously that wasn't good. But actually, we had a direct relationship with huge numbers of audience who wanted to hear from us. And actually, the message became about survival and how would we get through this period. And people responded very generously. And of course, it was a strange time because we had this sort of captive audience. People were at home, but they wanted to hear about things that they love. And actually, I think people then began to think about theatre and lots of other causes and things that they loved and began to really miss it. So, yeah, we reached out to our audience and asked for their help, and they responded incredibly generously, both in terms of kind of mass giving campaigns with millions of people supporting, and then of course at the other end of the spectrum, the really large gifts from a smaller number of philanthropists who's really saved the National Theatre.
That's amazing. And you are so right. I think in the middle of the COVID crisis, I think we did all sit at home and think, well, I mean, I think I thought the world had gone crazy. And reaching out to those things that were important to us, because the ordinary life that gets in the way of you thinking about the things that mean something to you wasn't there. And so it gave you the opportunity to think differently. Yeah. And has that influenced how you might campaign in the future, do you think? Or do you think that campaign was a moment in time and things have moved on again in a different way now?
No, I think it has influenced the way that we work now for the better. I think it really helped us understand that philanthropy, and I mean that at all levels, I'm not just talking about major gifts, but philanthropy is very much says something about who we are as individuals. We were really struck that the low-level members, if you like, the priority members, people giving £80 a year, a lot of whom we thought saw it as a transaction. You pay your £80, you get your priority booking. The membership renewal rates stayed really high. People did renew, and that we weren't giving them anything or they weren't giving them the benefits that they signed up for, but people renewed. And then we thought, okay, well, people are renewing. They want to stay. They want to still feel like they're part of the family. And we created lots of different ways of making them feel that by, digital events and lots of digital content. We all became expert in organising Zoom events overnight, which is quite stressful.
I can imagine.
But, so Zoom events where suddenly hundreds of people were joining online to come to talks and things that we'd organised. We were organising from our kitchen tables. But I think there's something about understanding that philanthropy is a part of identity and not just... I'm not just talking about people giving millions of pounds. I'm talking about the people making small donations. It says a lot about who you are, I think, as a person. I think the other thing that we did is we became more confident about asking for unrestricted support for the theatre. I think historically we've been quite reliant on saying, we've got this fantastic education programme. We need to raise £500,000 this year to fund this thing. Let's please give us some money for that. Or we've got a fabulous new musical. It's really expensive. We need some extra support to make that all happen. And because we didn't actually know what we were going to do at that point, we didn't know when we were going to reopen. We didn't know what the shows were going to be. At that point, we didn't know if we were going to be work digitally, if we were going to be able to get people back in the building or not. So we couldn't really ask for anything in particular. We just had to say, support this place that you love. So we asked people just to have more faith in us, I suppose, in our decision making, in our leadership, and that worked really well. So we're still trying to encourage our supporters to trust us, actually, and to make unrestricted gifts where they can. Now, of course, some people do want to support particular things, and that's also brilliant. But it's given us a bit more confidence, actually. It's saying, actually, we are the National Theatre. We are brilliant at what we do, and we need support. And being just more confident about that kind of charitable message.
Yeah, that is quite something. I think opening that key to unrestricted giving is a different way of looking at things, and that's quite amazing. And I wanted to ask about retaining donors. Is there a particular strategy to retaining people? I mean, I guess because this is such a special place, I sort of have it in my head that why would you decide not to give money here and give it somewhere else? Because if you love the theatre, this is pure magic. Yeah. But I wonder if there is a deeper strategy to how you keep donors on board. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our fundraising goals increase really significantly every year. I mean, they increase by several £1 million every year. So it's we absolutely rely on people giving again. That's, we really need to retain people's support and then find additional support as well and keep them all with us, which can be a challenge. But as you say, if you really love theatre, there's no better place that you can put that investment essentially. But yes, we do have strategies. I mean, that's right from the membership program. It's the way we communicate with people, the way that hopefully we deliver a great experience. Whether that's someone giving, making an annual gift of £25, we want people to feel good about that. Or if it's somebody making a 6 or 7 figure gift every year, at that top end of people making very large gifts, we have really sort of carefully considered what we'd call a stewardship plan for each donor. So we think about
what is it? Why is that donor giving us money? What is it they like? What is it they value in terms of their relationship with the National Theatre? Who is it that they are most comfortable with in terms of our staff team, in terms of our leadership team? And what is it that makes them want to be part of this family? So we then try and create moments that speak to their priorities. We're doing that in the UK and we're doing that with our donors in the US as well.
But I think that's quite key to how you think about it. What you said around donors being a part of the family, I think is really important. Earlier on, you said about donation being a part of your identity and being a part of the family. And I think that is such a passionate way of looking at it. It isn't just simply, I happen to have some money, so I'm going to give something. Yes. Where shall I give it? Yeah. Oh, well, I guess the National Theatre is amazing, so I'll just give it there. It's loving everything that you do and feeling like you belong to that organisation and that you're a part of it. And I think that's a really lovely way of thinking about it. And I think for the, potentially some of the people listening to this podcast, I think that's some of what we try to get across when we do those recognition pieces is the reverence to the place, but the reverence to the people as well. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's kind of always been my philosophy leading the team, has been that I want people to make the most generous donation they can make. And it might not be the biggest donation, but it's what's the most meaningful gift for them, whether it's £100 or it's £10 million. It's about making a gift that they feel really good about.
Yeah.
And
it's I think from the heart.
It is from the heart. I mean, fundamentally, giving money is an emotional decision for most people. And of course, it has to be backed up with, is that money going to be spent responsibly? And, is this the right thing to do with the money? Because it is an investment. But really, I think the best sort of philanthropy comes from the heart. It's something that you feel intrinsically that you want to do. So it's right that we encourage, I'm always encouraging our staff to think about how to bring people into the wider National Theatre family.
And how does that work with commercial donations? So, big businesses who want to donate, because is it a little bit harder to get that family orientated approach because they are a business?
Yeah, and we probably wouldn't talk to our corporate partners with that sort of language, really.
No,
but it really varies. I think there are some big corporates where it is more from a sort of philanthropy strategy and it is about support. But then some of our biggest corporate contributions, it's a business decision from a marketing budget.
Yeah.
So we have quite a range of different approaches. The way that we measure success in terms of any corporate partnership will depend on what that corporate wants to get out of it. It might be more of a marketing sort of partnership, or it might be more of a sort of supporting something in a more traditionally charitable sense. And sometimes it can be both. We have to sometimes try and speak to a number of different agendas.
So when you got to the point where you thought in the campaign that we were a part of, we need a recognition piece.
Yeah.
What did you think your key requirements were going to be for that piece? I know we may have delivered something completely different than your expectations. Yeah. So we're really interested to kind of, if you were to write a brief, what would be the things that you would include in it?
I think at that point, we were completely exhausted. The theatre was pretty much open again, I think, when we started talking to you. But it was really hard. And I think we've always done sort of donor boards in-house because we have amazing creative departments here. We can make things, obviously, in this huge factory that is the National Theatre. But everybody was so stretched. We'd lost a huge number of staff to redundancy necessarily to survive at this point as well. So I thought, actually, I really need some outside help in terms of how we think about this. But I was quite nervous about that because we do tend to do things ourselves in the way that we think is right for the National Theatre, I was quite nervous about asking a third party to come in, especially a creative. We're a building full of brilliant creative people, and the thing that I knew was most important was that it felt like a really creative piece of recognition and it felt really authentic to the National Theatre. We have such strict design principles in this building, and this building is full of brilliant designers. It became really apparent from the first interactions that this was going to be a great partnership because there was such as you say, you used the word reverence earlier, there's reverence to this building and the amazing architecture here, and I think your designers really seem to really revel and really enjoy that sort of challenge of coming into a really iconic space and thinking about how to respond to that brief.
Yeah, we absolutely loved it. I mean, it just brought out every bit of passion that we had, because it is such an amazing building and such an incredible place with an immense history. I mean, it scared us a little bit as well, to be fair. It's like, oh, how are we going to solve this problem? Yeah. But I always think there's something really interesting in how you brief a designer to come up with donor recognition. And, you know, I think there is a long history of donor recognition. And when I think back to buildings I've been in and places where there's older pieces of donor recognition all the way through to new ones, I think it's really interesting at how we can be innovative, but also that idea of being respectful to the people that have donated, because obviously the worst thing that could happen is one of them walk into the building and go, what did you do?
What is that? Yes.
That wasn't what I expected.
Absolutely.
And I'm aware that we tried to be challenging, but within the parameters of your design guides. But also I wondered how that works for your team, you know, around, okay, I'm going to brief these designers. How innovative do you want it to be?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you were doing it again, how innovative would you want the next thing to be?
Oh, I really want to be challenged. I want to be surprised, which is what this place is all about. I think it's all about your imagination and seeing things that you haven't seen before, and also seeing beauty in that way. I think it's very easy for people to think that donors are sort of another species. You know, big donors are a kind of homogenous group of rich people, as if it's sort of cash point in the sky. And they're not.
Yeah,
they
don't
audience
have any feelings.
they don't have any feelings.
Yeah.
These are audience members who give money here because they love being part of a creative organisation. They love sitting in the space and watching a story unfold on stage. Being really creative and coming up with things that we couldn't have dreamt of was what happened, and also is exactly what I would want to happen again. But it was quite a difficult brief because it's a really tricky building to work with.
It is a really tricky building.
But I think that's why we needed to come to you guys to say, look, these are all the things you can't do, and there was a very long list.
There was a very long list.
Including attach anything to a wall.
Yes.
But yeah, no, you surprised and delighted us.
Well, I mean, you know, I think we're really proud of the results, but you know, we do always sort of wonder what it feels like from a client's perspective.
Yeah.
And you know, there's always that thing of getting the balance right between reverence and innovation, and you can't go too far one way or the other.
No.
If you're too reverent, then potentially you've just created a headstone.
Yes.
And exactly. If you're too innovative, do donors feel like, well, actually it's more about the piece and less about who I am and why I gave in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
So I do find it's a challenging line.
It's a really challenging line, but I think the team got it exactly right, and that was a real collaboration with artistic leaders here as well, and that's what you know. I was really a facilitator. My team were facilitators in that process. Whenever we're working on any major fundraising initiatives, it's really closely with the artistic director, the executive director. It's about the artistic leads in the organisation, and it was really important that was all plugged in right from the beginning, because it's their decision, and what goes up on a wall or in a public space is a real statement about who we are as an organisation, artistically as well.
And I think we really loved working with the team, you know, talking to the lighting designers and working out how we might illuminate things and looking at the finishes, and the fact that everybody from your side have that design background to be able to say, we want it a little bit more like that or a little bit less like that.
Yeah.
That's really lovely, because it means that we're a part of this collaborative process and we get to a result that everybody's really happy with. And there isn't that ta-da, and everybody goes, oh, well, that wasn't what I thought.
Yeah,
I was
exactly.
getting.
No, it was great. We had sort of the prototype hanging bars that we had in our office for a while, and we showed lots of people. Yeah, we also showed the donors that were on it. A couple of those names are trustees, and you know, I was going, you know, what do you think? I think this is going to be great, but I was so nervous about the key people seeing it. But there were a few people we'd involved in the process. The evening we unveiled it, I was sick with nerves, but there were a few key people I knew really loved it, so I thought I think we'll be okay.
Because that's also really interesting once you get into the recognition piece and the design of it, how you bring the donors along, because obviously I'm imagining that each person has a slightly different sort of opinion or
Absolutely.
a different approach,
Yeah.
or has a different vision in their heads about what they're going to get.
Yeah.
So,
And I talked for quite a long time about this amazing installation, thinking, I don't know what it's going to look like. So I do feel I'd sold it to quite a few people without really knowing what it was going to be.
Yeah. I mean, does that get a bit sticky sometimes with, because I suppose in this instance, there's a group of donors.
Yes. Yeah.
If 80% of them say it's great,
Yeah.
is that okay?
I think
is
that's
that
fine.
enough?
Yeah.
of
No one's told me they
consensus?
don't like it. So, and a lot of people told me they do. So I'm happy with that. I think it's just really interesting that people respond well to what that installation has done to change that space entirely. And I think that's the other thing that's great. We were a couple of nights ago, we had a dinner there to celebrate a donor who's made a really generous contribution. Their name is on that installation, but we've named another part of the building for them as well. But actually it was great to do a dinner underneath that installation, because actually it's just made that foyer space so much more beautiful, so much more attractive, that it's become a space that we're really excited to entertain people in a way that I don't think we've never done that before. In the almost 50 years of this building, I'm not aware, certainly that in the sort of 16 years I've been around, we hadn't ever done a dinner in that space before, and we've done 2 in the last 6 months in that space.
Amazing.
And it's kind of opened up a new opportunity for us.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah. Anyway, I should stop talking about the donor board that we were involved with. Sticky question.
Yeah.
Future-proofing donors. There's obviously been a lot of conversation in recent years over big art donors, and then potentially them turning out to not quite be the people that everyone had hoped that they would be. Is there a process for that, or really is there nothing you can do, and what comes out in the end comes out in the end?
Well, I think there's a lot that you can do, and there's a lot that we do. It's been a bit of a process over the last few years to really tighten up what we call the due diligence process. But it is complicated, and it changes all the time
hugely.
because new information comes to light or public perception changes. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon any charity to accept, I can't remember the legal terminology, but essentially a charity needs to accept a gift unless it can prove that refusing it is in the better interest of the charity. So basically you have to say yes unless you're really sure that in saying yes, you're going to cause a major problem to the charity. You can't just pick and choose and say, I only want these 3 donors. You have to take money from people who offer it to you. But in terms of that reputational piece, that changes, because somebody that people would love one day, some information could come to light a few months later, and suddenly nobody wants that name associated with their organisation anymore, and that's changing all the time. But we have a brilliant research team here. We have a fantastic woman who heads up our sort of essentially intelligence team. So she's got access to all sorts of information about the sources of funds, where people's investments are, all stuff that's public information, but is not easy to find. It's more than a bit of Googling, put it that way. So we've got a pretty good sense of how any individual, corporate or trust has made their money, and we can make a decision as to whether or not that feels appropriate to accept that money to the National Theatre. Almost always is, but there have been moments when we've said, oh, actually that doesn't feel quite right, and then we have an escalation process where we take it to different levels of seniority, and ultimately it'll be a board decision if we're going to turn down a gift.
That's the risks involved feel quite large, but the fact that it is being fueled by lots of activity outside of anything that you can really do anything about.
Yes, yeah.
And I think it's nice to hear that your strategy is to do your very best to make sure that you're accepting money from the right sources, but equally, there's only so much you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that a lot of my peers across other similar cultural organisations will also talk to each other, because actually this is a shared problem, and I think it's quite helpful when you've got a tricky situation to be able to speak or to have a similar philosophy or similar thinking, because we are a sector. None of us are that unique in these problems.
So I suppose that brings me kind of back to the future. So we've talked a lot about how the model potentially is changing, and that maybe we're heading a little bit more to the American model, where there's potentially even less public funding and more private donation. Thought about how we future-proof things. What's the future like for you and your team here at the theatre? Well,
I mean, it's to be ambitious. We have to be, because we don't want to scale back our mission as the National Theatre. The economy being as it is so fueled by inflation at the moment, that we have inflationary costs are having a huge impact on the theatre because we make a lot of stuff and we employ a lot of people. The cost of doing the same thing now compared to 5 years ago is really different. We are really committed to having accessible ticket pricing, so a third of our tickets are £20 and under every year, and that's something we're completely committed to. So we don't want to raise ticket prices to the point that it's going to have a really detrimental impact on the size of the audience. And we know that government funding will continue to be challenging. I mean, we hope it won't continue to decline. We would love to see it increase at some point. And there are different, the theatre tax credit is a massive part of it's not a government subsidy, but I suppose it is, but it's not through the Arts Council. There are other ways that the government initiatives make a real difference to the National Theatre, and that's a crucial one for us at the moment, which is on a temporary uplift, so that's really positive for us, but it is on a track to go back to its pre-pandemic levels, and that's a multi-million-pound loss to the National Theatre when that goes back down to its pre-pandemic levels. So as ever, it does come down to how can we find the money to do what we want to do, and it does always come back to me and my team to try and solve that problem. So it's good to feel needed.
Absolutely. But slightly scary.
But we do we're a bit hostage to our own fortune, because we say, oh my goodness, I'm not sure we can do that. That's a really big number. And then we sort of somehow hit it. And then the number increases. And then we somehow hit it. And then, to mix my metaphors, we haven't made our own bed and we have to lie in it. But no, we are, as our audiences continue to grow, so should our fundraising.
Amazing. Well, I think that's all I have to ask. And I just want to end by just thanking you so much. It's been really fascinating to get under the skin of giving and fundraising within the National Theatre. And I really, really appreciate your time today. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Ali. It's been really great to talk about it. And we, as I say, we absolutely love what you and the team have created for the National Theatre, and we'll enjoy looking at it for many years to come.
Thank you, because it honestly was an absolute privilege to work with your team on that piece.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you for listening to our latest Wayfinding Xchange podcast. Stay tuned for further episodes and feel free to contact us with any questions and suggestions for future episodes.